This video is for BTEC Sport and Exercise Sciences, Unit 6, Coaching for Performance and Fitness, and specifically looking at A2 qualities of a coach for performance and fitness. Now, many coaches are volunteers, but ultimately, whether they're paid or not, the hope is that coaches are professional. And the specification focuses on this overarching quality of being professional and having professionalism. Now, you might obviously have had experience of your own coaches, and hopefully that they represent this, and you will understand therefore what it means to be professional. It could be any of these things. So the way they present themselves, how they dress appropriately, are they prepared for any training sessions they lead with you? Do they pitch language appropriately, not swear, not treat you with disrespect? Do they respect the officials and any opponents and any opponent players? Are they honest and fair? Do they reward you, especially if you're trying hard rather than just if you're, let's say, a goal scorer? And do they abide by this code of conduct that every sports national governing body provides? So broadly speaking, those are some of the aspects of being an effective coach regarding professionalism. But you're required to look more specifically at what qualities a coach might have in order to be effective, but also in order to be professional. So what is a quality? It's a distinctive attribute, something that you possess, or a characteristics that you possess, and represents how you are and perhaps therefore how you behave. So it's the qualities, the aspects of you, the characteristics of you that you possess. And obviously being an effective or good coach requires really certain qualities. Your specification is here. So as I said, professionalism is kind of this header, and then there's a list of a lot of qualities that might represent what being an effective coach is. Now, you aren't necessarily expected to give detailed analysis of all of these in terms of their value and why they're important, but you're certainly required to represent and explain and analyze a good proportion of them. So why is it important for coaches to possess those qualities before we look at them in too much depth? Because coaches are there to be role models, and we'll see that when we look more closely at the qualities. You must, as a leader of any sort, in any context, really lead by example, because you're shaping potentially the attitudes and the behaviors of those that you coach. You are creating a social situation. You might model behavior or have expectations of them in terms of how they should behave, how to work as a team, how to be fair, how to treat people, how to respect people, broader than just the team or the sport, but in terms of life skills and citizenship. And I guess that goes into the personal aspects. Sport teaches you a lot about life, winning, losing, being frustrated, coping with those frustrations. Sport can also be a career, so you might help shape the people that you're coaching and support them in terms of perhaps what career they might go into. You create situations where socialization happens and their social skills will develop, and hopefully it's a positive interactive situation within a team or even within a club. You also importantly might help shape your participants' self-discipline. If a call goes against them or somebody is frustrating them, having that social restraint and knowing what's right and wrong, really powerful psychological and social qualities and skills. Psychologically, again, your sporting life can help shape your identity, who you feel that you are. Dealing with losses or poor play, let's say you don't play well one game, building resilience to be okay with that, to accept that, to be determined to improve and keep working at it, to be optimistic about being able to change it, and again to control your emotions. That might mean controlling things like frustration or anger. That might mean controlling some level of excitement if you've won. You don't want to be obnoxious winners. You need to balance that and recognize what's appropriate. And then finally, of course, physicality and physical health. As a coach, you contribute towards attitudes and behaviors and literally the physical activity of your participants. You may contribute towards their nutritional guidance or understanding, helping them build healthy habits for their lifestyle. So these coaching qualities aren't just about whether your athlete or your team wins or loses. It's about shaping them and having an influence on them in a much broader sense. So we're going to look through a lot of the qualities. Again, I'm not going to go into loads of detail here. This is just a snippet to give you a sense of some of them. And in your work, you'll have to pick several of these, not necessarily all, but several of these to apply through sporting scenarios and explain what they are and explain how they might impact positively the situation, the players, the dynamics, the performance, but also to recognise, again, for analysis, if coaches don't have these qualities, how that might negatively impact what's going on. So the first few, I've kind of clumped them together. You don't have to, but you can. I think some of them naturally sit together. I've clumped timekeeping and organisation together. Now that could be timekeeping, the coach being on time to the session, or even getting there early to set up before your team arrives. Obviously that's really valuable. Timekeeping within a session, knowing the appropriate length of drills. You don't want to spend too long on something or not enough time. Making sure that there's time for warm-up, cool-down, basic timekeeping. And also broadly, organisation, being organised with having the right equipment, planning your session thoroughly, managing and organising the players within practices and drills, might involve booking facilities. So there are loads and loads more reasons and examples of how a coach, how timekeeping and things like organisation are valuable, important qualities for an effective coach to have. Now, some of these qualities are, I think, pretty obvious, and you will, again, relate to them through either your own experiences of being a coach or being coached. Coaches ideally need to have positive attitudes. If something doesn't go your way, the last thing you want is the coach to be whinging and nagging and down and miserable. They need to be enthusiastic. On a wintry, dark night when it's 8 o'clock and you're going to training and it's cold, that's when they need to really bring you alive and, evoke your motivation. So demonstrating positivity and demonstrating enthusiasm, being a role model, will really help you buy into what they're getting you to do. And obviously being a role model in particular is much, much broader than that. So how the coach behaves, the attitudes that they present are powerful, especially with young players. Because if they look up to their coach, the chances are, and if they think they're great, they might want to copy them. So if the coach demonstrates any kind of bad behavior, you think of some examples, then the risk is that the players will take on those attitudes and take on those behaviors and copy them. If the coach shouts at the opponent or the official or the other team's coach, that kind of suggests to the players that that's okay, and maybe they will do that too, which clearly isn't a good thing. Showing empathy and being approachable. So the relationships, I guess, within teams or between coaches and individual athletes can be really powerful. Your coach might work with you for years. It might be just a season, but it could go over several years. And ideally, they get to know you, you get to know them, and you build up this understanding. And empathy kind of means that you can understand their perspective. You know what they're like. You know how they might feel about things, and you're accepting of that. For example, if you ask somebody to take a penalty and they're really not feeling that confident about it, if you can empathise, you will relate to why they might feel anxious, they might feel pressured, they might not feel they're good enough. So it's kind of, can you get in their skin and can you understand their perspective and what they might be feeling? And that's really powerful for a coach. You might understand the decisions your players make or the feelings that they show or the behaviours that they show if you can understand them better. And that kind of understanding might come from talking, from listening, from being approachable. If your players have perhaps some problems within your sport or some anxieties or even problems to do with their personal life, if you're an approachable coach, they will feel trusting in you and comfortable to approach you to talk about it. There's obviously advantages for those sort of social qualities. Well, you also have to be cautious. You also have to, perhaps as a professional, keep a certain parameter or boundary between you and your players. And again, when you're talking about the perhaps negative impacts of being too close or too open with your players, or sharing too much, or, being over familiar. That's worth considering too. Again, think of your own positive and other negative connotations of that. Kind of develop from that, then getting to know your players. Your players will all work differently. They'll have different psychologies. You'll have some players who are pretty confident, some players who might lack confidence in their abilities. You'll have some players who like attention, like to be, stood out, and other players who just want to be part of the team and not make a fuss. They will, clearly have different personalities. Some will get frustrated and annoyed. Some will be very positive and accepting of situations and resilient. And you as a coach need to understand your individual players. There'll be different abilities, of course. So in your training sessions, you might need to pitch skills or drills or fitness at different levels to accommodate everybody's needs. Your players will have different aspirations probably. You might be coaching a team where some people are desperate to win and that's what they care about. They love competition. And other players are there just to enjoy it and might not be so driven. And that's quite challenging. And as a coach, you need to understand that. And of course, different learning styles. So some people prefer listening to instructions. Some people prefer being shown. Some people need to actually work through a drill and physically do it to get their head around what's required of them. Again, understanding the individual needs and preferences, and as much as possible, trying to account for them can be important. You might not be able to do it all the time, but understanding that people are different and people are individuals is important. And ideally, being able to adapt what you do and how you speak to somebody. Some people might respond to a firm, stern, come on, you can do this, get grit, Some people, that might really upset them, and you might need to have a gentle approach with them. So as a coach, to be effective, you need to be versatile, adaptive, flexible with your approaches to hopefully fulfill what your players would prefer. Clearly, a huge part of coaching is observing, watching what's going on, watching performance, watching tactics, watching how performers perform technique and skills, and analysing them and figuring out what they're doing well, what aspects of their performance are not great, whether it's looking at an individual person, somebody doing a high jump, what aspect of that technique needs adjustment, might you need to develop, or observing a broader performance like a match or like badminton, looking at the rallies that go on and the tactics of the opposition and figuring out what you recommend your players to do to try and overcome those tactics. So being analytical is an absolutely essential, central part of being a coach. It's basically problem solving. You watch something, you listen to what players say, you recognise what strengths and weaknesses are, you try and figure out the best strategy to do that. Whether that's in training or in competition, you need to make judgments to figure out what to do for the best. And ideally, you set clear expectations of your performers for what they need to do to get better from your analysis. And I mentioned coaches need to be problem solvers. It's all very well observing and figuring out, seeing what's going on, what the strengths and issues are, but then you need solutions. And sometimes those solutions need to be in the moment. For example, in a basketball game, something's going astray, you might call a timeout, and in that moment you've got to have decided what you're going to ask your players to do to resolve the problem, to solve the problem. So that's quite an important reactive need of being a coach, to be able to go, right, this is not going wrong, you do this, off you go. Providing alternatives, being adaptable, even if you've got a strategy that you wanted to do, if it's not working, you've got to be able to figure out what to change. And that could be pretty stressful, especially if it's a heightened competition situation. The more experienced you are, the chances are the more times you've had to face these challenges, the more chance you've got of having a repertoire of ideas and other suggestions to give to overcome those things. But ultimately, you might need to think quickly and make decisions in the moment. And that's a really valuable skill, particularly for competition. Now, in order to know what to do to solve problems, it could be that you need to have knowledge. So again, coming with experience perhaps, but also coming with training and with attending continuing professional development courses. Have you got your level 1? Have you got your level 2? Have you got your level 3 coaching qualifications? Do you regularly update your knowledge? Do you hear about and explore more recent or current tactics or techniques or strategies or training methods? So being an effective coach, you need to know what to do and what to say, and that comes from ongoing training and insight and learning. You don't just know it all immediately, you have to update your knowledge. As we've addressed already, it could come from experience, so you have to practice being a coach as much as you have to practice being a player. You reflect upon your own experience. What worked for you when you were a player, if you were, and what didn't go well with you, and maybe you use that to try and optimize your own delivery as a coach. And you need, the more experienced you are, the more confidence you have, the more, even if you're not feeling it, you have to present as being confident, which is a real skill of a coach. And of course, being reflective. You might plan a brilliant session and it just doesn't work. You have to go away from that session. I mean, if ideally you adapt it in the session once you realize it's not working, but if you didn't, then you go away and you reflect on, well, okay, why didn't it work? What can I do differently? Is it to do with my players? Is it to do with my explanation? Was it too difficult? How could I make it more accessible? Again, being analytical and reflective isn't just about the players and how they perform. It's about you and how you perform as well. So you might need to have targets to work on or things to try and do better. Or again, go back to training to find out other strategies that you could use within your coaching role. So this is essentially grabbed from one of the course textbooks. Some of this information is just helpful to get you to understand what each of the qualities means and could be. What you've very much got to do is make this your own, develop these things. Remember, you've got to describe, explain, and analyze. Use a range of sporting examples to show that you understand what they mean. And as I've said earlier, you can clump several together, give a sporting example and explain a few of them through that sporting example, making sure that you show analysis by pointing out why it's effective, why it might have a positive impact, but also without it or done wrong, without those qualities, why a coach might be ineffective or less effective and why it might have a negative impact.